I am Paul Vixie. Martin and I drew straws to see who would speak first, and I got the short or long or whatever straw. As the moderators tonight, we're mostly here just to sort of keep things to a dull roar, keep things calm. A number of people have pretty strong opinions about what ought to be done about various things. It's great to have passion. It's not great to throw food. So we are hoping very much that we can pretty much say and do nothing. But if somebody, if any of you start acting as though you've got rabies, then you can expect to have a net thrown over you. Otherwise, let's see what we can do to expose the divergent views, see if we can converge those divergent views, and make some progress tonight on some issues that are near and dear to all of us. Martin, you want to introduce our first speaker?
Yeah, I'd like to introduce Betty Burke from Merit.
Thanks everyone. This is a new role for me to be up on the podium. I've been involved with NANOG and Merit for a number of years. I do want to, a few slides that I'll share in a moment, but I do want to welcome all of you tonight and thank everyone for taking time to come to the community forum tonight and for all of the active dialogue in the email list. I think it is important, and we share the same common goals for improving NANOG. We want to especially thank everyone who is involved in helping to launch the various forms of communication tonight. I know that we have some additional features, and again, I think reaching out to the community and all the various forums took a lot of effort from a lot of folks, and I wanted to especially thank everyone. One of the common themes that I want to share with all of you tonight, and I shared with some folks that I met with in Reston and in dialogue, in email and other forums on conference calls over the past couple months, is that we at Merit and many of you here tonight recognize that we need to evolve NANOG, that NANOG is, as many of us in our business activities day to day, an evolving organization. Evolving organizations need to change. We need to have good dialogue and feedback so that we can have managed change, and we're on board with that. I hope that one of the messages that I can convey to all of you tonight is that I don't see tonight as an us and them situation. I think that we all want the same kind of community involvement in NANOG. We just need to have open dialogue and feedback to get us to that continuous change. So again, the goal for tonight is to get your input, the community's input. I suspect tonight is a good start, as the discussion that we had in Reston at our last NANOG meeting and in email, and it will continue. I hope that NANOG is an organization that continues to be open and allows for us to have that kind of feedback. Just a brief history. Some of you probably already know this because Susan R. in her presentations at the opening remarks of most of our meetings talks about the background of NANOG, but I thought it would be important just to set sort of the expectations of where Merit has been involved in the ongoing operations and how the meeting itself has evolved over time. Many of you recognize that NANOG grew from the NSF Net Backbone Service days in 87 through 95, where Merit was the organization that operated the NSF. Merit was chosen to do that operational support role and continues to be involved in NANOG today because we see ourselves as an organization that brings diverse technologies and organizations together in a very neutral environment. At NANOG, we operate a regional network called MishNet. There's some facts and information about our regional network that services the state of Michigan, but in addition, because we're vendor neutral, or sort of ISP neutral, we see ourselves as playing a vital role in helping to keep NANOG a neutral environment to service the community. At least that's our goal in doing so. Some background information in terms of how the meetings have evolved and the chair roles up through today. 94 through 95, Elise Garrick at Merritt, who was very involved in the NSF net, helped to plan the meetings and host the meetings. 95 through 98, Bill Norton assumed some of the roles of chairing NANOG. Had a conversation with Bill just a few weeks ago about the evolving change that took place under his leadership. What Bill reminded me was that any organization, again, needs to be involved in the community, and what Bill was recognizing during his time in leadership of NANOG was that he wasn't as in touch with everything going on in the community, and so even though he was very involved, he elected to form an advisory group, a group of colleagues that helped to plan the meetings and deal with agenda issues. In 98, NANOG underwent another chair leadership change, and Craig Labowitz assumed responsibility, and under Craig's leadership, we actually formed the first program committee, actually putting together some structure to the number of folks on the program committee, and just really beginning to put some focused energy into an actual agenda and program. In 2000, Susan R. Harris became the chair of the program committee, and in large sense is probably the most visible person at Merritt to the NANOG community. Susan has worked very, very closely with the program committee and very, very closely with me in my operational role of making sure that the NANOG budget and the NANOG place in the Merritt organization is stable and supported. Having said that, I think it's important to recognize that that Susan R. Harris is not just the only person at Merritt that cares about NANOG and cares about the community and all that we're going to talk about tonight. I'm chiefly responsible for the NANOG budget and helping to select the sites and work with the hosts and put together the logistics of the meeting. And as some of you found in Ruston, ultimately I'm the senior lead person at Merritt responsible for these meetings, and I report directly to the Chief Information Officer and our President at Merritt, Mike McPherson. So in terms of the overall reporting relationship and receiving input back from the community, I felt it was really important to step out front and have all of you get to know me and to take information back to Merritt so that we can evolve the organization and deal with the change that needs to be made to address some of your concerns. Susan R. Harris continues to play an important role for NANOG. Even though I'm not as visible and our team at Merritt aren't as visible to you, Susan does an amazing job in terms of helping to put together the website and the actual agenda information of the program and getting it put forth. Susan also, as you know, deals with our list moderation. And while we may acknowledge that there are some issues with list moderation, and we'll talk a little bit about that, it's an enormous job, and Susan does an excellent job in terms of continually reading the email and staying involved. I see all of the email that goes by and participate in dialogue when appropriate. But given my role at Merritt, I can't stay on the front lines, as I'm sure many of you can appreciate. Just dealing with the day-to-day issues can be overwhelming. Doesn't mean that I'm not involved in not caring. I want to thank the current program committee. As we indicated, the program committee was established a few years back, and we have an excellent program committee in terms of the time and commitment that they make in putting together the meetings. I know that from the dialogue in Ruston and some of the information that we received tonight through the Reform website, and we'll probably have some further conversation about, the program committee also recognizes that there may be an opportunity to change the structure in which folks get appointed onto the program committee. I don't think any of us for a moment can truly appreciate the amount of time and effort this particular program committee has put into making these meetings happen. The amount of dialogue that goes on and the input that they provide to Merit in terms of just overall guidance is just immeasurable, and I want to especially thank them for their effort and time on all of our behalf. One of the things that I thought would be important for all of us here tonight is to sort of set some of the expectations in terms of the volume of information that we see go through some of the Merit systems. One of the things that we know is that there is some discussion about how the NANOG email list is managed, or just in terms of some of the conversation that takes place. What I wanted to do was give you a little background information in terms of the number of folks, or email addresses actually, that are subscribed to the list, and just give you a sense of how large your community is. The email list, again, started out of the regional tech days. It became the actual NANOG list that we use today in 1994. And as you can see, as of Thursday, when we left Ann Arbor, Michigan, there were 7,919 actual individual addresses subscribed to the list, with, we suspect, a number reaching close to 10,000 of people who actually participate or read the email list because of the number of exploders that are involved. I thought it was also important to give you some information in terms of the kinds of information or activity that has occurred since 2004 with the volume of list moderation activity. There were 10,500 actual unique messages that went through the email list. I mean, I think that's quite a large number of emails in just 1 year that speaks to the importance, we all acknowledge, of having a community-based email list. There were about 460 private messages since 2000, about 2 a week, if you take the averages, that the moderator sent to particular individuals or email addresses trying to deal with list moderation. About 135, and these are approximates. I didn't want to get down to actually counting every single activity and email messages, but again, just setting the stage. There were 135 that dealt with spam management topics. In talking with Susan R. and with the program committee, there was certainly a recognition that in mid-2004, what was really operational need to discuss spam management was being over-moderated, and we acknowledge that. There were 29 email messages that were really viewed by Susan to be non-operator content. And we also acknowledge that because Merit is a regional provider, and because Susan nor myself are actually active operators, we probably missed the target. 29 out of 10,500 unique messages were based as being probably operator-oriented messages and were over-moderated. 67 had to do with sudo. Upon request, the .sig was added, not a problem. 52 of those 10,500 email messages that went through our list really had foul language in them. Foul language is pretty obvious in a common community. Yes. That's since 2000. 46 of the email messages really had to deal with politics, not unusual in an election year. But again, trying to keep the list somewhat on target. We tried to keep politics out of your email list. 47 of the email messages dealt with personal attacks, someone chastising or picking on someone else. 29 email addresses, and I want to clarify that, 29 email addresses were temporarily removed since 2000. And we don't always know when we remove an address whether it's really associated with a person or not. So 29 actual email addresses were suspended. One of the policies that we have in dealing with support of the AUP is that after 2 warnings, if the behavior doesn't change, on the 3rd warning, your privileges are removed. So you're sort of warned, and we ask you to keep something on topic or refrain from picking on someone else or refrain from using foul language. But after 2 warnings, if the behavior continues, you're suspended from the list. Depending on the type of abuse, if you will, of privileges, from if it's just some profanity to some personal attack, the suspension may be anywhere from 3 to 12 months. At no time has anyone ever been denied the right to resubscribe. So upon request to NANOG support, anyone can have their privileges reinstated after 3 to 12 months and resubscribe to the list. We have never denied anyone the ability to rejoin after behavioral changes. One of the things that I thought was also important when I was putting together the information to share with you tonight was just a brief overview or graphic of the attendance for your meeting. From '94 to our current meeting in Ruston, you can see the trend of growth in the NANOG community. It speaks to the importance of what we're about tonight, what we're here to talk about, which is the community. Just the large number of folks who make the trip to our meetings 3 times a year is demonstrated in this slide. One of the other comments that I'd like to make in terms of what it takes to put these kinds of meetings together to address these numbers. Merit has only been forced since '94 to increase your registration fees a couple of times, which is pretty amazing when you think of the kind of involvement that we have with the hotel and our host to put this meeting together. One of the goals that I shared with the folks that I met with in Ruston in the fall, and I continue in my responsibilities in managing NANOG's budget, is to host this meeting for all of you at these numbers without raising the fees so that it makes it difficult, if not impossible, for some to financially attend as many meetings as possible. So one of our goals is to bring a lot of technology and organization to your meeting, but not increase the registration fees. That's our number one goal, is to try to deal with the resources and the budget issues of hosting these meetings creatively so that it's not put on your shoulders or on your back through your registration fees. And again, since '94, we've only had to increase those fees a couple times. That's really it. I don't have much more to say in terms of formal information. I could go on and on and on about the background of Merit or in terms of our commitment to the NANOG community. I thought it best to keep my remarks brief and listen to all of you. I will turn the mic over here in just a second to Steve, and he will address some issues from the program committee point of view in terms of how the program committee deals actually with today's agenda preparation and some evolving changes that occurs in that group. My final comment is just that I'm all ears. I really do believe that one of the important elements of what we're about tonight is to keep a NANOG organization together to support the community. We share that goal. We just need to reflect, get input, be thoughtful about how to evolve change, and hopefully tonight is a good kickoff and a good start for that beginning. Okay, thanks.
Steve Feldman.
All right, this is the part where you'll get to laugh at me while I try to make the projector work. Okay. Wow, I'm impressed. Okay. Hi, I'm Steve Feldman. I'm a member of the NANOG Program Committee. So I'm here sort of representing all the other members of the Program Committee. I also... Oh, okay. The mic will stay near me. There we go. That works. All right. So I'm Steve. Hi. I'm a member of the Program Committee, one of the 17 that Betty mentioned. The other 16 helped me an awful lot with this presentation. So a lot of the good ideas in here are theirs. The mistakes are mine, of course. I also should mention that I work for CNET Networks since I paid my way to get here. Okay, I'll start off by talking ancient history. I should mention, by the way, that this talk is about how we select what goes on the program. It's not really intended to go beyond that. So if I don't answer some questions, feel free to ask them later. And if it's something in our purview, I'll be happy to answer. Anyways, Betty mentioned a lot of this already. But in terms of how we selected the program, originally when NANOG was formed, there was a chair who did all the work of finding speakers and lining up the agenda and figuring everything out. Of course, that was a lot easier when the average attendance was maybe 50 people. Bill Norton took over the program committee and, as mentioned earlier, took over the chairmanship and formed an advisory committee to help them. This was fairly informal, and he used a mailing list to coordinate everything. Modern history. Under Craig's stewardship, the program committee was more formalized into a set group of people, and the mailing list discussion continued. As proposals were received, there was discussion on the mailing list that eventually was feedback to the chair to decide what to include and what not to include. This continued pretty much the way the program committee operated until last year when we decided we really needed a better system. So we started discussing this last spring and instituted it for the fall meeting. And I'll talk about the process in the next bunch of slides, so I'll leave that for a surprise. But the basic idea is that instead of just stuff coming in and we sort of kick it over informally, we now have a formal process for dealing with submissions and selection and how we discuss and deal with them. And this is a process, we didn't just set it up and forget about it. We're continuing to refine it. There are some feedback we'll get from this meeting that we'll use next time. First thing to keep in mind is the goals of the program committee in selecting talks, and that the main goal is to select talks that you guys want to hear. To that end, we sort of have to define what our audience is. This list that I have up here pretty much corresponds to what the attendance statistics have been like over the last couple of years. Where content providers probably a little bit lower down the list, vendors maybe a bit higher down the list in terms of percentage of attendees. But keep in mind that the operators are at the top of the list, and that's what we want to keep. Criteria for evaluating talks. First one, of course, is relevance. We want it to be about operational experience. That should be obvious. Hopefully it is, and it's something that we try to keep in mind whenever we're evaluating a talk. Second major criterion is technical content. Is the presentation actually discussing anything real? Is it marketing vaporware? Are we looking at a lot of pretty pictures, or how to build a network? Next thing is quality. Are the slides readable, that kind of thing? Is it in English that people can understand? Or is it incomprehensible gobbledygook? And third thing is the speaker. If we actually know the speaker and have some idea what they're going to be like in front of an audience, that may help or hurt a little bit in terms of the selection process, although it's not near the top of the criterion. So here's the timeline that we go through in putting together the program. First thing that happens is a call for presentations. This is done a couple of months before the meeting, usually right around the end of the previous one. The call for presentations has a deadline for submission of topics. More recently, we also require completed at least first draft slide set, so we have some basis for evaluating the talks as well as an abstract. So the talks are due 6 weeks before the meeting, or the proposals are. At this point, the program committee sits down and starts reviewing them. We have them all in front of us. We can look down them, read through the slides, read through the abstracts, and rate them. After we've gone through this process, we have a conference call. All the program committee members who have rated talks get on the call and discuss what we've seen. Not mentioned here, but an important thing is that up until this point, we really have no idea what each other have said, so it's a blind evaluation. So I don't base my evaluation on what one of my co-members might have said. I have to review it myself. So, result of the conference call, we come up with a list of people who will accept or people who will reject, notify them. There's a period where we accept late submissions, and I'll explain that in more detail later, and then finally come up with an agenda. I'll mention that for this meeting, since there was a short period between this and the last one, and because of the holidays, the cycle was a bit rushed, but we still went through it. So the program, the call for presentations is sent out by the moderator to the NANOG list, includes suggested topics, submission requirements, and the schedule. Once they've come in, the review period opens. Each program committee member is supposed to review all of the talks and rate each one on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the best, and add comments. And as I mentioned earlier, we can't see what each other have said until the conference call. We also adopted a conflict of interest policy last year. There was some concern that people on the committee might have vested interest in whether some of the talks are accepted or not. So it is a requirement now that anybody on the program committee must disclose any possible conflict of interest with any of the proposed topics. Once they've done that, they may choose to recuse themselves from discussing a topic. But if they don't, then at least they have made the disclosure so that we know where they're coming from. This has actually worked out pretty well for us, and we've had a few people, mostly working for some of the equipment vendors, who've recused themselves when people from the same company are proposing talks. We have a web-based rating system that we developed, so we can actually go through and enter comments and stuff. So you can see this is a fake talk. You probably can't read it from back there. Don't worry about it, because it's not real, because I didn't want to embarrass anybody in public. But you can see that maybe I can rate a talk from 1 to 5, or I can choose not to put in a rating, and then there's a box where I can enter comments. And then once that's done, we all get to see a page that looks like this, which has all the comments together, all the ratings, and a pretty little graph that shows what the mean is and the distribution. That's what we take into the conference call. So we go through this. There we go. We go through the list and go down through each talk and decide whether we're going to accept it as it is, reject it as it is, or conditionally accept it, which means that we'll go back to the author and say, this is okay, but here's some stuff we'd like you to fix. We might assign a program committee member to shepherd the author through to help them get it into shape. And then we will review the submission once the changes have been made, and at that point decide whether or not it's worth accepting. Late submissions will be considered if they're exceptionally high quality or exceptionally relevant, like some major internet event that happened last week, and if we have an available agenda slot. sometimes the program is so tight that we can't squeeze anything else in. Other times there really wasn't enough content to fill an entire meeting, so we have some available slots. The procedure for dealing with late submissions is less formal, partly because program committees all gone back to our day jobs at that point. But we do discuss them on the mailing list, and the chair ultimately looks at the discussion and decides whether or not they should be included. The agenda is set by the chair after the talk selection is done. The agenda is fluid until it's actually sent to the printer, and even beyond that, if something happens to change, the speaker can't make it, or we get a really last-minute addition. And finally, I'll talk about what happened for this meeting. We had 9 proposals by the deadline. During the conference call, we decided that we would accept 14 of them, reject 4 of them, and tentatively accept 1 of them, which was eventually accepted later after the revisions were made. We had 5 late submissions, of which 4 were accepted. And these numbers include, by the way, not just the talks, but the BOFs and the tutorials as well. So that's really all I have to say, other than a blank screen, and I'll happily take any questions that you have at the end. Thank you.
Dan Golding, reform proposal.
Got a Mac, so I have to get my little extra cables hooked up there. That's not. That's it. Okay, let's get started. Hi there, everyone. My name is Dan Golding. I'm going to be talking to you today about a proposal that's come up from a group of concerned NANOGers. And that proposal is basically NANOG reform. You guys have probably seen a little bit about this on the NANOG mailing list. There's a link that went around. There's a reform proposal. Let me tell you a little bit about how this sort of came out and what happened to precipitate this. First, as I think everyone knows and everyone has seen, there's some continuing problems with the NANOG mailing list administration. First, there's sort of uneven moderation standards, and you know, I'll try to keep the complaints to a minimum. You know, we've had a lot of time to complain to Betty. There have been a lot of complaints on the list, but there are some pretty seriously uneven moderation standards, including some very well-known and great contributors being banned. And this has happened a couple of times. There have been some issues with this. There's a lack of, again, on the mailing list, there's a lack of transparency, and there's the perception that there's not much reasoned decision making going on in the moderation process. And finally, and maybe most importantly, there's a breakdown in mutual respect and collegiality. And that respect goes 2 ways. You know, it's the respect that all of us in the community feel for Merit when we're dealing with the mailing list matters. It's also the respect that we show to Merit. You know, every time there's a particularly heavy-handed bit of moderation, you know, someone will post some kind of satirical email from someone with a pseudonym, maybe a few letters reversed in their names. It's kind of a vicious spiral. And of course, because it's a mailing list, there's no way to really stop this. You can't ever stop anyone from resubscribing to the list, because anyone can get a new email address anytime they want to. So unless there's sort of respect from the beginning, unless the whole process is filled with the fact that, you know, I respect Joe, he respects Chris, everyone respects each other, things tend to spiral downwards in sort of a really negative way. There have also been some issues with the NANOG meetings, particularly the agenda. The program committee, and this is an attack on any particular person on the program committee. I think everyone here respects the work the program committee does, respects the individuals tremendously, but there is the perception that the program committee is out of touch with the general operator community, that the selection of topics is extremely uneven. There's some great topics that are of really kind of pressing interest to the whole community, and there's some other topics that aren't really of interest to almost anyone in the operations community. There's also sort of the perception of powerlessness on the part of the NANOG community. That most of the operations community feels that the program committee is sort of a closed circuit. People on there are choosing people who will succeed them. The merit folks are choosing the people on the program committee. Even some of the program committee people have privately expressed some frustration about this, about the fact that they don't feel they can communicate openly and honestly with the community. So that is all of the complaining. That's all the complaining that will be in this presentation. There'll be plenty of opportunities for more complaining later at the podium, but I'll stop complaining now. And so let me tell you about how this whole NANOG reform thing came to pass. This is essentially kind of an ad hoc working group of about 40 people who got together. And the way this came about is there was sort of a spontaneous, I hate to call it a protest meeting, but sort of a spontaneous meeting between these 40 people who sort of got together after the last NANOG that was out in Reston, spoke with Betty Burke, who's the person at Merit who's kind of responsible for all things NANOG, and sort of expressed their feelings. It was definitely a frank exchange of views, shall we say. And this group was a very varied group. They're representative of kind of all the constituencies that make up NANOG. There were former speakers, frequent attendees going back to the kind of single-digit NANOG number meetings, previous hosts. There were participants who worked for vendors, for researchers, operators, sort of the whole gamut. And probably a more representative group than, for example, the program committee is. And these folks, after the meeting with Betty, decided, okay, we've now sort of had our therapeutic talk. We've got this off our chest. So what do we do now? Now we're going to get together, we're going to form a mailing list, and we're going to figure out a proposal that we can bring to the rest of the community to sort of move things forward and to sort of help resolve some of the issues that have come about. So we came up with this proposal to sort of fix what's wrong so we can move forward. And the work product, the link is up here, www.nanogreform.org. I think a lot of people in the room have probably read it. A lot of people have endorsed it, which we all appreciate. But the big proposal is this, in one sentence: turn NANOG into a membership organization in partnership with Merit. So, what does this mean? What are the specifics of this proposal? This won't vary too far from what's up on the website, but it's an elected board of directors / steering committee. There's some people who feel very strongly board of directors isn't a good word. There's implied fiduciary responsibility. Some people like steering committee. Whatever, it's a committee. 7 members, staggered 2-year terms. 1 member elected as the chairman or chairperson or chair. Board responsibilities, essentially selection of a list moderation committee and a program committee. Sets policy for the mailing list and the conferences. Responsible for sort of organization goals, directions, working with these committees, working with the Merit staff, working with the meeting hosts, working with sponsors, speakers, and the larger community, working with partner groups like Aaron, and also possibly budgetary oversight. So the big question, and the thing that a lot of folks had trouble with this proposal, was who votes for this committee? Who is NANOG's membership? And this has always sort of been a quandary for all of us. What makes someone a member of NANOG? It's the North American Network Operators Group. But who's in the group? We took a stab at it, and the stab that we took at it was anyone who's attended a conference in the last 12 months. This could easily be modified to anyone who's attended a conference ever. It could easily be modified to someone who sends in a small fee. Kind of insert membership criteria here. This is one of those things that has to be worked out. I suspect in the end, perhaps the most inclusive way to do this is say something like anyone who's ever attended a NANOG conference. But basically, if you ask why there has to be a criteria, it's because in any voting process, there has to be some way of sort of defining the constituency and actually figuring out who's a real person with a vote and who's, not a Gmail or a Yahoo throwaway email address or whatnot. So more specifics. Okay, so we have kind of a steering committee board of directors. We also have a list administration committee. This committee, who would be chosen by the board, would be responsible for NANOG mailing list administration issues, coordinate use of peer pressure and other techniques to keep the list on topic, where on topic is liberally defined and not really narrowly defined. This group must be technically knowledgeable and have an understanding of all the issues that can be discussed on the list. in aggregate. One person doesn't have to be the master of everything. They'll implement the steering committee policies for the rare imposed moderation action. And I think rare is sort of the key word here. We'd like the list to be far more self-moderating, and any policy, any moderation that does happen would be performed in sort of a transparent manner. This group would also be responsible for the upkeep of the FAQ and maintenance and expansion of the FAQ. And we have an example that this has been done very well in the past. We did have a volunteer group who worked very hard on making the current NANOG FAQ. They did a great job. Those are exactly the kind of people we're talking about. Okay, so more specifics. There'd also be a program committee. Much like today's program committee, very similar responsibilities. Probably they would be a little more proactive with things like speaker recruitment and selection. They'd probably be much more upfront in actually chairing the NANOG meetings. They'd be coordinating with Merit on venue selection and preparation. They would be selected by the board of directors for a fixed term, a rotating fixed term. Because right now we have, I guess, 17 people on the program committee. They're all fine folks. I think a lot of people in the community, a lot of people in this reform list would like to see more operators, and we'd like to see people sort of being cycled on and off on sort of staggered terms to sort of get fresh blood in, let people have a break because it is a lot of hard work, and then maybe at some time later get them back on the committee. And of course the question is, what is Merit's role? And Merit's role is important. Hosting of the NANOG website and mailing list, and also doing the things that Merit does very well. When we complain about the mailing list, we complain about the meetings, we're sort of missing the fact that Merit does an awful lot of things for us, for the community, extremely well. And so I guess what the forum group would like is for Merit to keep doing the things it does well, and the things it doesn't do well, have volunteers do. That seems to be a win for everyone. Therefore, Merit would do things like registration, fee collection, financial management, coordination with a local host for venue selection. They'd be represented on the board of directors. It would become more like a true partnership with the community. So the future, where do we go from here? Almost the last slide, winding it up. Where do we go from here? One thing is community buy-in. If you haven't endorsed this proposal and you think it's a good idea, please endorse it. Further work, the place we'd like to go to from here is bylaws and initial elections for these bodies. Of course, we need buy-in from the community and also from the Merit folks for this. We need the cooperation of Merit and partner organizations like Aaron and Ripe to kind of find out the proper way to go about this. And those are sort of the positive outcomes. That's where we want to go. So what are the undesirable but possible outcomes? And again, these are sort of undesirable. One of these would be Merit sort of taking input from the community perpetually, which can happen sometimes with organizations. We'll keep listening. Obviously, that's undesirable. Continued erosion of NANOG mailing list value. It is something that's valuable, I think, for all of us. And it's valuable for more people than we will ever see at a NANOG meeting, maybe 20 times as many people. And erosion in that would be very, very bad for the entire operations community, not just service providers, enterprises, pretty much the entire network operations community. And the other kind of really negative outcome that we don't want to see is a split of the community with a rival operations conference in association with Aaron, something like RIPE. I think that is a possibility. I don't think anyone particularly wants that to happen. It wouldn't do us a lot of good to have two, dueling ops conferences, but that is a distinct possibility. So, who's responsible for this proposal? Here are the criminals. The folks are people like Jan, Randy. Most of these folks are here, a few aren't. Steve Gibbard, who really did a fine job putting together the actual written proposal. Patrick Gilmore, myself, Mike Hughes, Rodney Jaffe, Simon Lockhart, Chris Miliater, Ren Proville, Michael Pai, Adam Rothschild, Alex Rubenstein, Joshua Sahala, Rob Seastrom, Randy Whitney, Stephen Wilcox, and Tim Yoakum. And if I mispronounced anyone's name, keep in mind I normally just say your IRC nicks. So there are actually many more people who are involved, maybe another 10 or 15 people who are on the NANOG reform mailing list. These are the people who are actually identified as authors of the proposal. There's a real good cross-section here, everyone from the current NANOG meeting host to folks who've been previous hosts. A lot of folks, some folks have been on the program committee, a lot of previous presenters, longtime attendees, etc. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's move it on. I'd like to thank Steve and Betty and Dan, our scribe, Lauren Provo. We're going to go ahead and open the mics to questions and answers, and we'd like you to state your name, your affiliation. You don't have to state your affiliation, but it would be nice. And if you can keep your remarks to a few minutes and help us get as many people behind the microphone as possible, that'd be great.
Hi, my name is Bill Norton. I'm affiliated with a company called Equinix. Is the microphone on?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. There are a lot of things in the proposal that I like, and one observation I would make, Dan, is that I think there already are a number of competitive operations forums that kind of have spun off already. The Equinix Gigabit Peering forums, the PAX forums, the NAP of the Americas forums really grew out of there not being enough forums for peering coordinators to get together and meet each other. So to some extent, we've already have that one component. The one other observation is that one thing that you said I still have a hard time with, and that has to do with the agendas, missing the mark operationally. What Steve Feldman showed was of the 19 talks for this time, 14 of those were accepted. And I guess I'm having a hard time seeing a wealth of talks that are kind of tossed to the wayside.
Well, if I can answer that, I don't think I was implying that there were a wealth of talks tossed to the wayside. In fact, I think one of the things that sort of a revitalized program committee could do better, and I hate to throw stones at this group because I think they're doing a good job, but one thing is they could be recruiting specific talks and specific speakers who on topics that might be of interest to the larger community. But I don't think people are being wholesale rejected out of hand. I'm definitely not saying that. The other thing to keep in mind is, as far as the peering forums, I think those serve a very small section of the community. You and I are part of that community, and I think they're extremely valuable. But for the larger operations community, they're probably not as interesting as it is to you and I.
My name is Rob Seastrom. I work for a company called Clue Trust. I'd like to respond to Bill's comment about the wealth or lack thereof of possible topics. Is this mic turned on? It doesn't sound like it's turned on from here either. Okay. I think that this is one of those situations where there's a perception among those of us who might be inclined to give talks that the barrier to entry is substantially higher than it actually is. And I've had comments about stuff that I have thought about for talks, and I don't want to get into the specifics of that right here now, but I've been discouraged from actually submitting these on the basis that it was deemed to be not particularly interesting, although further investigation suggests it's actually quite interesting. I have some other comments that I'd like to give at this point. Merit did the right thing by standing by NANOG when it was not a winning proposition financially, and but it was good for the internet community. And I believe, at any rate, that it is right and reasonable that Merit continues to reap the benefits of that relationship now that the budget and at least the revenue stream based from NANOG is substantial. My back of the envelope computation suggests as well in excess of $350,000 a year. To help secure this relationship, I'd like to ask that Merit continue to do right by the community at large by undertaking these steps that Dan has suggested to maximize responsiveness to the community. I'd like to tell a little story about CBC, which is a nonprofit that I helped create back in 2000 up in Massachusetts. From its inception till 2004, I served as the president. Reluctantly, because I no longer lived in Boston and felt that the interests of the constituents would be best served by having the leadership come from within the community, I took the nomination to be president in 2003, but made it clear that at the annual meeting in 2004 I wouldn't run. And we found new candidates to be the president from within the ranks and elected them at our annual meeting in 2004. I'm still involved in that group in an advisory capacity. They don't always make the same choices that I would make. But they, as a group, not I, are the community. And I'm just part of the community. I'm not the community. And I can't suppose myself to be the final arbiter of what is and isn't the right thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Harris. Anybody else? We've got plenty of time. Any questions at all?
Let me just make one comment just about the budget, Rob. It's important to understand that Merit is a 501c3 nonprofit, and sorry. So clearly there is an issue of having enough reserve in our accounts to be able to pay for the upcoming events or schedule. Matter of fact, right now we're scheduling meetings in advance to try to secure great venues for the meeting and to get the greatest discount on hotel bookings and site locations as we possibly can. But that means that we have to have the reserve in the NANOG account to handle that liability. So while there is a reserve, I'm not going to deny that at all, it's a committed reserve. And as with any nonprofit organization, as well as with the community that we're here to talk about, I'd be happy to share any of the details with anyone. And maybe one of the things that come from this discussion is perhaps some follow-up information that NANOG could provide the community on some of the details on how we deal with the budget numbers, if that's important to all of you. I think at some point it's a matter of trust. That we're doing the right thing, but perhaps what we need to do is improve upon by giving you some more detailed information. I just didn't want to leave that point going unchecked. Yeah, there's definitely some reserve, but there's also a great deal of financial liability that Merit assumes by putting this meeting together. We bring a tremendous amount of staff that we have to have on hand. A number of the staff put in a great number of hours, just free will. Just dedicated time to support all of you and be with you. But that staff also comes with the travel expense and all of the other elements.
The point that I was making is that the reserve is a good thing, and that we're certainly grateful for the help that Merit provided back in the days when that reserve was not there.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I'm Paul Dixie. I'm switching microphones briefly to follow up on something that Rob said about something that Steve said, which is about program committee roles. I have periodically spoken at NANOG pretty much whenever Sue has asked me to, and my universal comment at those times has been, gee, you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now, aren't you? The thing that is unique about NANOG, which I don't consider really to be a feature, is that the program committee is not empowered, right? You've taken people who are members of the community who are busy and they have day jobs, and they and twisted their arms to the extent that they are willing to commit resources, they commit time, they'll spend, they will do the con calls, they will do the reviews, they'll read all this stuff, but then as quickly as possible they have to get back to fighting fires and doing the things that they do in their real life, and that tends to be true of any program committee. But the thing I'm hoping comes out of this is something kind of like a sort of one of the ACM driven conferences or USNICs or something like that, which is that the program committee of the future, with or without this particular reform proposal, will go out and twist arms in the community and find the sort of latent talks that a lot of people are thinking, yeah, I could talk about that, but I don't really know if it's worth putting the time in, or maybe I'm just lazy. But if somebody were to come twist my arm, I would probably, do the right thing for the community, which is, put the work in, put the time in, and go give that talk. I expect a lot of people, not just in this room, but in the NANOG community, have got things that I would like to hear about. And I will not make the mathematics mistake of sort of faulting the program committee for selecting only 14 of the 19 possibilities, or selecting the wrong 14 out of 19. But it would be better if there were 50, and if some of them were deferred until the next quarterly meeting or whatever. And I'm leaving tomorrow at 8 a.m. because the agendas for this time hold no interest for me. And because for about the last 10 NANOGs running have spent the entire time in the bar talking to people instead of listening to the presentations. So, with or without incorporation, membership, fees, voting, boards of directors, I'm urging that a reform of the way that the program committee is empowered and be done, so that the twisting of arms that resulted in people signing up for the program committee will then turn into those people reaching out and twisting other arms to get more and better content, just for the pleasure of saying, actually, no, that's not good enough.
Thank you.
Hi, Steve Wilcox from Telecomplete. Just two things, which are probably points that Dan made, but I'm just going to underline a little bit more anyway. The first one is that the document that's on the NANOG reform site, there's a few bits, it's a work in progress. There's some things in there which I've been discussing with people that hasn't been presented, kind of off list and things. Some people have got bits of it they're not happy with. I'd like to do this, I'd like to do something else. We can tweak all that stuff. The important thing is to kind of get the main thing right, you know, this board that we're talking about, get that in there and then try and get as much input from the community and get all the details figured out. So the people who've been kind of emailing me about details and I'd like this, just do the first thing and get the board in there and get the ability to get your ideas in, and then we can shape all the rest of it. Don't worry about what it's at the minute. The second thing is that even if you don't have a criticism of the current program committee, anything like that, the system that's been proposed, that's a community system, is going to be good for everybody, because you might not think there's any problems right now, but maybe something will happen in the future and you'll be upset with something. At this stage, you can make sure that you've got people in there, people who are sharing your views, and you've got them in there right now, and that moving forwards, we've got this committee in place, and just the openness that's needed. You know, you get my point.
Thanks, Steve.
Matthew Ringel of Tufts University. To make a specific, concrete recommendation, to speak to Paul's point of, have something relevant, have talks that are relevant. I think one thing that may guide people stepping forward to give talks, or a way for the program committee in whatever incarnation it may eventually become, is something that I've thought of with being a best current practices track. Specifically, saying, okay, fine, there's operations, there's engineering, there's architecture. Those are the three legs that a network stands on. And anybody who's here is pretty much has their finger or foot or some other appendage in all three in some case. Best current practices unite all three. Having a track which is, okay, here's the best way I know of to do X. And then maybe, there's a whole list of these talks. The program committee can go through, either say, okay, fine, you two people do a bake-off, have a joint talk about what your best current practices are for building a lab, or nomenclature for a network, or something along those lines. And this way, people can come up from the audience and say, well, actually, this is what we think are best current practice. But this is operational content. This is, straight up, no chaser. There you go. And I think this would get people to step forward and actually bring material that people would genuinely be interested in operationally.
Great idea.
I'm short. Chris Molater, TDS Telecom. To Betty's point about the financial disclosure, I think that would be a wonderful thing for the community to see how Merit does actually dole out the funds, where it goes to how much are you banking into the reserve, how much are you using to pay your staff, how much of it are you actually using for the conferences. I think it would be a great pie chart to see, quarterly, yearly, whatever, so that we understand where our money is going to, rather than the black hole. Sometimes that helps clarify things for people. And the other thing, to go with what Steve is doing, that the NANOG Reform Group is a working group. So just because we have a draft that's out there, our main goal was to have something in between the last NANOG and this NANOG ready to for a meeting such as this, so that we had a work in progress, a draft that we can, put out there and see what people have to say about, what we've put together. So please, if you want to get on the mailing list, it's quite easy to do, and keep working with us on getting the best proposal for everyone. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is that, if there's 80 or 8,000 or 10,000 users on the mailing list, and only 400 people are showing up at the conference, are we succeeding in operation? Getting the operational content out there? Why are the 7,500 people that are on the list that aren't here not here? What is it? Because of the administration? Is it because of the content? Is it because there's just no money for people to come? Is there a lot of legacy people on there? I think that there's a lot of questions around why we don't have a larger attendance at these conferences.
Thanks.
Thanks, Chris.
Can I just?
Well, I
Thanks.
actually have, if you're going
Oh.
to touch on the financial thing,
Sure.
he said 80% of what I wanted to say.
Okay.
I think that there is,
State your name.
I'm sorry, Alex Rubenstein from NetAccess Corp. So I think that there's probably a large contingent of people here who feel that the amount they're paying for NANOG, they don't know where the money goes. And that's pretty much what he said. And I think it would go a long way if NANOG would potentially have maybe even an informal financial report after each NANOG to let us know revenues collected, where the money went, and what's left in the reserve and what's being added to the reserve. I think that would go a long way. One other point with the program committee, there seems to be a lot of people complaining that the program committee should twist arms. They are making a solicitation for things on the agenda every NANOG, but maybe there would be a better approach to potentially look for specific items that would want to be discussed or specific panels to be created and invite people directly to participate in those panels. That's all I have.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'll echo since Andrew Partain isn't up at the mic, so Andrew's pointing out that the program committee
Name?
has in the past.
Can you give us your name?
My name's Barry Green. Cisco Systems also wear a program committee hat. So the program committee has gone out there and kind of tried to get people recruited up there, and twist arms to get people up. But I'll speak to that point in a minute. First off, I agree in the principle of what the NANOG reform's doing. I think it should go forward. I think it's very important, and constituency ownership of the constituency of any operations group is critical. And I think that lack of constituency ownership is one of the problems of NANOG today. Second, 3 people I want to point out. Ole Jacobson here, raise your hand. Philip Smith, Bob Berger, where's Bob? Is Bob around? Okay. These are 3 people that the NANOG reform people need to pull off to the side and talk to, because what you're proposing is APIA and apricot. So what you're proposing is APIA and apricot. So this is 10 years, close to 10 years of trials and tribulations of running an operations group, serving a constituency, and trying to make it all work, right? And they have some experience, which will be different. I think NANOG reform is going to run into some better success areas because of dynamics of the region and the constituency you serve, but this is an experience base that you want to draw upon about how you set up the structure, organization, with how the PC acts, things like that. So they have some very frank sort of things they can kind of share with you. So pull them off to the side, talk to them, pick their brains on that, because there's things that are painful with API and apricot over the years, just like there are things that are painful with NANOG as set up today. Program committee, I think a lot of the comments talk about the program committee is true, but echoing what Andrew's saying here, it's a lot easier to say you should go out there and recruit people. Making it happen is harder. Now, of course, part of the problem we got with NANOG is actually to make up the program committee, because whenever you refreshing the program committee is really, really important, because what's happened in the industry, and I think all of us knows this, there's a lot of fresh talent always coming up. There's a lot of bright people in operations, all over the industry. But the program committee, when they go out and recruit, all you can recruit is all you know. So in other words, if you have a lot of people who've been there forever, all they know is the people they know. They don't know any of the new talent because they're not out there working in operation places, right? So security side, since I've been working on the security side of it, we've been able to bring in new talent because there's a different constituency that the security side of NANOG serves, which is the NSPSec crew. So we're seeing all the new talent over there so we can draw upon it, right? So refreshing the program committee, which is part of the NANOG program, the NANOG reform proposal is quite critical. If you don't refresh that program committee constantly, you don't have people who are in touch with the talent base that's out there. And if you don't refresh the talent base, you don't know who to recruit to get up there. So it's kind of this catch-22. If you get the people who've been there forever, all they get is people who are there, you know, the old timers, right? And then your depth of and breadth of people you can recruit to get to talks is small. So it's harder than you think. And the next question is to Merit. You know, with this NANOG reform, means you're going to have oversight over it. Is Merit in a position to say we're going to let go? Because understanding how things are set up with API, APNEC, and Apricot, there's basically you're putting yourself underneath where you're contracting to this organization that's forming. So the thing is, none of this is going to happen if Merit says we're not going to make it, we're not going to let it go. You know, in Asia we had some of these issues in the past, and if Merit refuses to participate with this, then you got an issue with it.
Well, let me say, thanks, Barry. A couple points. The point being made about the current program committee and their desire to get involvement from the community is very evident to me. It may be, you know, not as broad a base of operator involvement as some of you would like to see, but there's no question that the current program committee goes and spends absolutely an enormous amount of time and effort to recruit participation. It's not just something that Merit does on its own. There's real buy-in from the program committee to go out and recruit talks. So it's not just sitting there waiting for the community to provide information. It's really working. The other point about the sharing with the community in terms of feedback, in terms of budget information, as I said earlier, I think that that's something we can certainly work at doing, probably should have done over time. One of the other comments that I shared with some folks in Reston, with our program committee, with my president back at Merit, is the need to share with you, the community, some of the survey information. You know, I'm listening, I'm participating in the dialogue as well. We ask all of you to complete your survey information after every meeting, and we get that information back. It's tallied not by members of the program committee and not by myself, but it's an independent compilation process and then presented for review. So we see all of the information, and we're a little remiss in not bringing that back to you. Again, trying to restate the need to commit to dialogue, to trust, so that you feel a part of providing input into the process, and us bringing it back to you is something that I'm certainly committed to. Barry, you make the point about Merit letting go. I don't really see us as letting go of anything. I see us as evolving change together. I don't see it's something that is so opposing that we can't come up with a structure together that makes the structure work for the community, as well as it makes Merit feel comfortable in its role of providing support for all of you. I may be naive here. I think that there are solutions out there. The reform proposal as presented is a great good start, and I think as we talked, as Dan mentioned, there's probably some rooms for change, some things that we may have to evolve, but Merit's certainly on board. The meeting tonight is an example. As I mentioned in Reston, I would put together a meeting at NANOG 33 so that the community could provide input. I'm here. We're supporting the input, and we certainly want to be a part of the evolving change.
I'd like to throw in a quick comment on behalf of myself, but in my program committee role. I tend to agree with some of the comments that we could be doing a better job of going out and recruiting talks. I know I personally could do better. An interesting observation, though, is that the people on the committee who seem to do the best at going out and recruiting people are those who aren't specifically operating networks right now, but are in roles that tend to put them in touch with lots of other network operators and have a broad base of people to recruit from. So just an interesting observation, which might even be true.
Yeah, a couple quick points on that, and also some comments on what Barry said. I completely agree, and I think other people in the reform group have noticed that there are operators groups in other regions that we could learn a lot from. And there were some folks from other regions who were actually on the mailing list making some suggestions. I think there needs to be more of that, because I think a lot of what we've done has been done. I don't think there's any point in reinventing the wheel, so to say. Folks know how to do this. Some comments on the program committee. When folks were discussing this, and there were a couple of program committee guys on the list, no one was sitting there dumping on the program committee, and I really hope no one on the program committee thinks that. That wasn't the case at all. Almost everybody who was on the list, looking at the people on the program committee, there's just a tremendous amount of respect for those folks. Not only the work they do, but frankly their personal knowledge of the industry, of routing, of all the operation stuff we do. And I think the idea there isn't to say, kick people out. It's more to say, okay, let's, as you said, rotate in more fresh blood, not rotate these people out forever, but just, get a larger group of people circulating through the spots. As far as sort of operators versus folks who come in contact with operators, that's sort of interesting comment. One of the first things folks commented on the list about the program committee was there were so few current operators on it that, I forget who said it actually, but one of the more witty comments was there are more former merit people on the list than operators on the program committee. And that's one of those things, maybe if there were more operators, as has been said, maybe we can, the operator committee can bring in some more fresh blood and actually hopefully come up with some more folks. And if those folks do prove to be useless, well, maybe we'll get more vendors. Whatever.
So about that damn program committee. I'm Josh Snowhorn from Terramark Map of the Americas. One thing I want to point out, we've hosted 2 meetings now, and we've had a great time doing it. I do want to point out, Rodney is an incredible talent for doing it without spending any money, but we spent about 2 times, a total about $85,000. So it was a serious commitment for us to do a hosting. So, it's understanding the kind of effort there. I fully support NANOG reform. I didn't really say a lot or author it, but I sat on lists and gave some opinions here and there. This last year, I spent about 200,000 miles flying. It was awful. I was waiting for my deep vein thrombosis and all that great stuff, but I was actually attending different meetings, going to Ripes and Apricots and going all over the world. It was eye-opening for me. What Paul said basically about staying at the bars, I think I've gone into a couple presentations in the last few NANOGs. I spent all the time hanging out in the hallways with my friends, having better discussions than I got out of the presentations. A way to cure that I saw at the Ripe and Apricot meetings, multiple tracks would be a great idea. Instead of one big giant meeting where you're really limited in the scope, have a few different tracks laid out. And something that these really drunken Europeans do at Ripe, they focus on the social side in a really big way in a lot of different evenings. And the social side is so critical for our group, be it the peering groups, be it whatever it may be. We love to get together and hang out. We're a bunch of friends here. And if you actually focus on that, not just the beer and gear where you run around and grab t-shirts as fast as you can and drink as much beer as you can and then go drink more beer and get sick with your friends later. Instead actually focusing on maybe a couple of nights where you actually have parties that are sponsored where it's fun. At Ripe, the party sponsor, all they do is give out maybe a t-shirt or something like that, but they spent a lot of bucks doing a really great party and everybody was dancing and people on the tabletops. It was crazy. Now seeing Robert Seastrom on a tabletop would be really good, but it's I'll bring a video camera. But something we should really look at is really important is the social side, on top of multiple tracks and everything else. I think it'd be great to do. Really, again, keying in on what the others are doing around the world, which are really innovative, really opened my eyes.
Hey. Just a quick comment on that. Some folks may go away and say, well, the social side, that's ridiculous. But, it's funny when it's 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning and you need something to happen with Network X and you've called their knock and the only person that's on duty is someone who maybe should be buffing the floor. And you need something to happen for your customers. You need something to happen for network stability. The fact that at that last NANOG, you're out at the bar with someone from Network X and their backbone engineering group who knew what to do. And boy, I have his card somewhere. I have his email. I'll call him and he'll know who I am, that I'm not just some faceless, annoying guy at provider Y. That is a, frankly, dollars and cents benefit to our operators. That's a big reason operators send people here, because they'll meet other people for peering, for troubleshooting, for figuring out what the best practices are. I mean, that social network is so important to just doing our jobs.
We'd always endorse more parties. Joe Provo, I'm relaying from EFNet a lot of stuff. So speaking for some people remote. There's some suggestions that are particularly minutiae about elements of the specific reform proposal, so on and so forth. One of the observations that came up a couple times was that smaller ISPs and hosting companies are not necessarily currently having their needs addressed. There wasn't a specific suggestion other than the fact that yes, tabulating the surveys is important, but it doesn't tell you why people aren't here.
That comment, by the way, on the smaller ISPs and hosters was from Dan Senni, who's a frequent attendee. And,
RFC author.
RFC author. He wrote NAT.
Also, there was actually a lot of echoing of the previous thanks that went forward to merit. This isn't a bash fest. Everybody acknowledges that there's a lot of work that goes into these things. Everybody just wants it to go to the next level.
Appreciate that.
Also, let's see. Oh, no, that was another survey comment. Also on the tracks, that, a lot of echo on the track comments that we could actually get more useful work done in multiple days as opposed to mashing everything into 1.5 or 2 days. Throw a few more days in there, make it a little easier to schedule from a business and budget perspective, because people have to justify these things, 1, 2, 3 months in advance in the current scheme of things. And that's the current set of questions. There'll be more later.
Thanks, Joe.
Spencer Dawkins from Tektronix. I wanted to say just a couple things. Speaking as a vendor, and I noticed I was last on the list of the priorities. The first thing was that I've gotten a lot out of coming to NANOG since 2000, and wanted to thank you guys for the work that you've done in the past. I have gotten a lot out of it, personally and professionally. I have read the proposal for reform, and you guys have done a lot of work, and it's actually quite good. The thing that I think I would say more than anything else about it is there's things in it that are at a lot of different levels of detail, it seems like to me. And so one of the questions I'm trying to come up with in my mind is how many different reform proposals are in there trying to get all out at once. And I don't know if people have thought about that very much or not. One of the possibilities is that you may be talking about things that are at a low enough level in, with some of the topics to where saying, oh, well, we're going to have the steering committee go away and worry about this in the future and actually make decisions about this. That may actually be a good way to treat some of the minutia that is in the that's in the proposal. But like I said, I like it, and I'm really actually very excited about the possibilities of where you guys can go with this.
Those comments are very interesting, because one of the folks who couldn't be here tonight, who contributed a lot, was Randy Bush. And after a certain point in the development of the proposal, I think he said a lot. Maybe that's something that the board can take up whenever they're formed, and that's too much. And I think after a certain point, when the proposal was kind of spun, there were a lot more minutia things that people came up with, good ideas, things that should be done, for specific mailing list changes to make proc mail easier and stuff like that. But it was like, okay, let's start another list of things to give to the committee whenever they're elected, and they can think about it. And I think the stuff that was put together, there's some minutia in there, and it's not fully baked. We just wanted to come out with a straw man that the community could talk about and see if in principle they would like it.
When I saw that you guys were doing a reform proposal here, I lived in mortal terror for a few days because I was watching what was going on in the parallel universe with the IETF reform proposal. I was thinking, oh Lord, not another one. I think you guys have fewer problems to deal with, and I think that's good. I think you guys have made more progress in dealing with the problems that you have to deal with than some other people have made other places, because they're they're facing a lot. But like I say, one of the things that they're saying a lot in that reform proposal is, gee, maybe the guys we're setting up in this proposal need to make this decision. So.
Thank you, Spencer.
Hi, Mike Hughes. Lynx is paying my airfare to be here this evening. And if you're in Manchester, we do great parties, so if you just ask us, No, I mean, Josh made some really valid comments. There's been quite a lot of valid comments. Some people already said some of the things that I wanted to say. I'm one of the people that's spoken at NANOG before, and I often get badgered to do things by the program committee, and I was asked to do something at this meeting, and I'm very guilty of not responding, but I have an excuse that's called one of my family died just before Christmas. So that's why everything's a bit of a rush, and I was pretty late registering to come here as well. One of the things about the program committee is, if you look at the list, I mean, Betty showed a list of the people on the program committee, and one of the things that sort of stood out, and somebody, I think Joe mentioned smaller operators, Dan Senny's comment, look at the list of the people on the program committee. They are 95th percentile. They are from huge operators, huge networks. People change over time. They may be working for small regional network when they join, but that's then bought out by somebody else and bought out by somebody else. So even the program committee does need some change. Does need to actually have the people change at times, particularly if people feel like they're not able to contribute in an operational way anymore. There should sort of be no stigma attached to them standing down or whatever, or even maybe even encouraged to say, well, is there anything you can do here to help, and encourage some new blood to get on. Just because there's so many people that are 95th percentile there, and they're the minority of people, not the majority in the room. The second thing, I'm a sort of program committee person over at the Right meeting, because I'm a working group chair there. We just had a meeting over of the working group chairs. We got together in Amsterdam in Schiphol Airport for a day, because it was just too complicated to organise everything via a mailing list. We actually just got ourselves in the same room, and our employers were good enough to let us take a day off work. And we sorted out stuff. One of the things that we've just decided is we're not going to have quite as many multiple track sessions, because one thing we realised having too many multiple track sessions was people couldn't get to everything. So we've just slightly reorganised how the week looks at a Right meeting. So the first 3 days are single track, and then the last 2.5 days are a multiple track, mainly because there were so many things being repeated. Like, I think the RIPE NCC were coming up and making their report to the membership 4 times in the space of a week, because it had to happen in so many different places: opening plenary, RIPE NCC services working group, NCC general meeting, local address policy, the whole thing. So we've kind of taken that sort of view there, that there's space for both sort of things to happen, single track and multiple track. The other thing, from the point of the proposal as it is, it's not one big large plate that you have to eat at once and be overfaced with. I think it's a working group, or as people have said, it's a work in progress. Certainly one of the key sort of factors that got us here was concern about moderation, and we've already sort of suggested this is how people would, we could propose to address issues with moderation. Break it down into bite-sized chunks if we need to. If we can do something between now and the next meeting about moderation, maybe make a start on putting a list moderation group together to help relieve some of the pressure points. Let's just do that now if we can agree on how we're going to do it in the meantime, because we don't have to take it all as one big overfacing meal. It can be done as bits. I think that was everything I wanted to say.
All good points. Thank you.
Chris Molater, TDS. I wanted to talk on the multi-track for one quick quick second. One of the things that multi-track could help with is where we have all of these providers that are starting their own tracks out, Equinix, Switch and Data, Terramark. If in the past, from what I've heard, Merit hasn't been overly interested in having meetings coincide right before or right after NANOGs, they didn't seem to be too receptive to it. But one of the things that I would suggest if we go forward with a multi-track environment is that you work with those vendors to bring them back into being a part of NANOG so that we don't, from a peering perspective, I can't go to every Switch and Data conference, every Equinix conference, and the Terramark conferences. It just does not work. My company will not spend that kind of money. And it's not that I don't want to see the people. It's not that I don't want the presentations and the content that are at all of those sessions, because normally the presentations are quite good. But if you work with those tracks to get them into a track, work with those vendors to get them into being a part of the program itself, that would help everyone, because it would consolidate a lot of splitting up that's going on that the marketing departments from the varying companies won't resolve themselves. If you could work with them to help them resolve that, that would make it a lot easier for all of us.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. Well, one other comment on Chris's remark was there are some other conferences too that NANOG could partner with. One of the others is MPLS Con, which now has about 250 attendees. It's held once a year. Unfortunately, it always overlaps a NANOG conference. And that's one of those things that, there are a lot of folks, particularly from vendors, who have to make the tough choice to go to one or the other. Especially now that MPLS is essentially a standard technology in a lot of our networks. So there are probably, 4 or 5, maybe 6 other conferences that it would be great if there was sort of a liaison role between, NANOG and those other conferences to try to lower our travel budgets a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question that Merit is working hard to try to find venues or meetings to sort of partner with. Our work over the past couple years with Aaron to do a joint meeting there, our desire to want to do a joint meeting with the I2 Techs community and with others. There's no question that we recognize the need to try to go schedule our meetings at a time that complements your travel arrangements to other meetings. There's just no question. I don't want to rain on anyone's parade or be negative about it, but it's also not real easy to find a venue large enough to host NANOG. And then second, it's also not terribly easy always to get transit or internet connectivity at the kind of bandwidth that we need. So we're there with you. We know that we need to try to find scheduling times that make it easier, that we're partnering with the community. There are just some logistics, and it just doesn't happen overnight.
So let me tell a war story on this to illustrate the point. CNET decided last spring that we were going to host, 2 springs ago, that we were going to host a meeting, an NANOG meeting. First thing we did was settle with Merit which one we would try to host. The next thing we did was get a list of potential dates for this. They gave us 4. So the next step is to go out and find hotels, venues that could actually fit this many people in this much ballroom space. Minimum 10,000 square foot ballroom. There are maybe 4 hotels in San Francisco that have that. So then you go to those hotels, you get bids, you've got to find dates. It's a challenge. We especially, for us, we thought we had a deal with one hotel. They basically sold the space out from under us at the last moment, so we had to go start the process over again. And this was getting like 4 months before the meeting was supposed to be. So I'm not trying to blame anybody, but just to say that coordination, scheduling is not an easy process, and it's not something that just magically gets done. It's a lot of hard work by a lot of people, and including the hosts. I would encourage all of you to try to get your companies to host us and see what it's like. It doesn't have to cost $85,000. We did it for under $10,000, and Rodney probably did it for $1.95.
This is Ren, and one thing I'd like to say is I think the RIPE folks have done a good job about having 2 a year in Amsterdam and then 1 rotating. If you have a facility that you use over and over and you plummet for the type of needs that a NANOG community would use, it makes sense from logistics and it makes sense for planning other side meetings around it, If you have, maybe it takes just one place that's a constant every year. We need to have some sort of constant to plan around.
Chris, you have
Yeah, that's good.
quick follow-up?
One other comment back a few comments ago. Anybody who wants to volunteer to throw parties for us, that would be great.
Somebody had to do it.
Get up here.
Thank you. Thank you. That's the right side. Anyway, my only point wasn't the logistics. I think that everybody here has said that something that Merit has done fabulously has been in coordinating the logistics. And I wasn't saying anything about that. And I understand that there's difficulties there. I'm saying that specific companies have attempted to approach Merit about partnering, and they have been given a not so friendly welcome about that. And that was my point, not logistics, not money, not scheduling things. I understand that's all very difficult. My point is just specifically, if you want to make it operator content and do a good multi-track, then you can't be giving potential people who might sponsor, might provide content, who would, whatever. I think you just need to, my point was that there needs to be a more openness in terms of dealing with companies who want to have adjacent meetings. That's, yeah.
Gotcha.
Thanks, Chris.
We're on the same page.
Tony Capella, Career Communications was CW Lab back in Chicago, October, a few times ago. Anyway, thank you for having this get together. This is a testament to how open we can very well be, and we should continue this in some form as time goes on. The comment that I want to make echoes a couple prior discussions here about the types of talks we've been courting or somehow attracting. And I know there's two ways this is happening. One is the program committee obviously goes out and talks to people they know, tries to get them interested in doing it, committing time, all those sorts of things. Others are where people just know about NANOG and want to submit topics, and out of the blue, they may get chosen, that kind of thing. What strikes me as interesting, though, is throughout all my years at various universities and schools in Wisconsin, being so close to Michigan, I never heard of NANOG until it was friends in the security community who happened to already be involved in NANOG who told me about it. And so I guess what I want to mention is there seems to be an element of activism that some of the newer communities that Barry spoke about before here, specifically the ones with a lot of fresh, newer talent, so to speak, that become somewhat visible somehow. And however that happens, if we could somehow become a similar structure to whatever gets that awareness out there, that might attract the kind of stuff we're looking for. Specifically in the best current practices realm, a lot of people at, for example, a lot of schools actually do have a lot of free time and would love to give talks, but may not even know what NANOG is. So that's my specific comment. Thank you.
Can I ask you one question? What about voice over IP? I mean, you're involved a little bit in the voice over IP space. Do you think there's any potential for NANOG getting more involved in the operations and engineering end of that?
I don't see why not. It's certainly a very relevant topic for a lot of providers today. The ones that I worked for, it happens to be more so, but I don't see it becoming less involved. It does pose specific questions, right, for networks, and I did see a talk at the last NANOG about a gentleman discussing how to size queues on links, and that has absolute relevance to something you're talking about. How do you deal with that kind of traffic flow on a large backbone and in a responsible way or a sane way? That's a very good question. Has anybody really answered it yet? I don't know about it. If they have, they certainly haven't suggested a talk to any ACM forums that I've been following and haven't been here yet. So let's get them here.
Thank you. Hey guys, so we've got about 20 minutes left, and we have a lot of speakers. So if you have a Me Too, can you save it for post-meeting discussion? And if you haven't spoken, please feel free to stand up. Let's tighten it up a little bit so everybody can speak. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Steve Gibbard, and I spend some of my time working for Packet Clearinghouse and some of my time working for a bunch of other consulting clients, but speaking pretty much for myself here. I was the editor of the reform proposal, so most of what I wanted to say has already been said there. I did want to respond to Spencer's comment about the sort of the trying to balance the minutia and the sort of broad framework in there. And my goal there was very much to make it a broad, make it a framework in which people could make decisions and in which everybody could be heard and and decisions could be made somewhat representatively. And so I think if there's minutia in there, it's supposed to be along the lines of making sure everybody can be heard, and just getting to the point where some group that's more representative than the NANOG Reform Committee can get put together and make the real decisions. So if there's anything else in there that seems too specific and not really along those lines, I think it was at least somewhat accidental.
Thanks, Steve.
Vijay Gill, AOL, and I'm going to disagree with almost everybody here. Regarding the program committee, it is much easier to sit around and complain about lack of presentations. The program committee is not the final arbiter of everything that they know about. Much more relevant is if you have a complaint, talk to people that you know who you think have something to say that you want to hear, and have them send in a proposal to the program committee. The very fact that the program committee only got 19 proposals is amazing in my opinion. It means there are not enough people soliciting or telling other people, go talk to the program committee and, hey, that project you're working on, that sounds really interesting. Why don't you go give a talk about it at NANOG? Most of the people sit on their ass, bitch about it all day, and actually never do anything about it. The second part is, a lot of the topics are no longer operationally interesting anymore. There's only so many ways, for example, picking a topic out of random, you can convert OSPF to ISIS. We know how to do this now. Things like running out of packets per second on routers, relevant back in 97, 96, where you have to develop like ATM meshes to go around the packets per second, are no longer an issue today. We can build arbitrarily sized global 192 backbones, just requires enough money, and Cisco works essentially for all that really is relevant. So a lot of the networking part that puts the NANOG, the NA part, North American Network Operators, is now cookie cutter stuff, basically things that are on the cutting edge are application level, things like voice over IP that run on a substrate that is pretty much at a dead end of evolution. We know how to build networks, we know how to scale them arbitrarily, we know how to interconnect. Far more relevant to most people today is not like buffer sizing on routers, but what's the latest sniping software so I can buy used cards off of eBay, or what's the latest cogent pricing. And that's... So keeping that in mind, it is far more relevant for the NANOG Program Committee to actually publicize what NANOG is, and people who, instead of complaining, should go out and talk to things like entities like Vonage, talk to Verizon, how's your SBC, how's your, fiber to the premise project working? How is Vonage sizing their session border controllers to pass through NATs? How is Skype affecting you? Those kind of things are far more relevant than, oh dear God, check this out, I managed to convert OSPF to ISIS. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
I'm too short for this. Okay, so
Can we get your name?
I'm going to that's okay. I'm going to back up what VJ said here, or try to. I'm going to totally agree with everything he's saying, but take it way further.
Yeah, who-
Casey. I'm Casey Claffey from CADA, and I've been on the program committee for many years. However, I'm not an operator or a vendor. I work in the research community. CADA stands for Cooperative Association for Internet Data Analysis. So by the way, I just need to take a measurement first. CADA's into measurement. and I've really been trying to get an objective picture in my head of what's going on here, and I'm kind of an outsider, because like I said, you guys are running the internet. So the people who signed that webpage in the room, like raise your hand.
Yeah, there's a lot of people here.
Okay, cool. So and I'm going to pray for an honest I'm going to pray for an honest answer here, because that's all I can hope for in trying to get a valid measurement of the system. But have any of you guys submitted material to the program committee for presentation at NANOG? Okay, and had it turned down?
What was the question?
Yeah, you're a special case, maybe. I want to talk to you about that, actually. No, I didn't mean that that way. I totally didn't mean it that way. Okay, back up. Okay, so it's okay. I'm going to step down after this. I have to tell you. So that's one thing, is that I've been watching this community for years, and I love you all dearly. But I've also been trying to study the internet for years, and I got to be honest with you guys, it's hard to get content out of providers and vendors. And anybody with a vested interest in the infrastructure, actually, it's very hard to get and that's when you're not one of their competitors. If you're in an audience of one of their competitors, I just don't understand why any provider would send someone to present something publicly at NANOG, where press is, about the operations of their network. So, as long as we're doing all this revisiting of logistics, I'm wondering if it isn't time to revisit what the goals are of the agenda part, of the public part of NANOG. I mean, I get the goals with the bar part, believe me. I'm all over that. But, no, that's totally legitimate. The connections, the networking, I mean, that's why I come, really, because I don't really understand half the talks and don't really have aspirations to understand half the talks. Right, so that's one thing, is I'm just confused on what the goals of what's on the agenda are, and it's the irony of solving the lack of operational content problem by adding 2 more tracks is not lost on me. And then there's one other thing, which is, as someone in the research community normally, this is also going to back up what Vijay said, we have this problem in this community, how to not produce crap, right? That's our job, is to produce some public archiving of what we learn about the world. And the internet research community, it's sort of what we learn about the internet. And if you think some of the talks at NANOG are operationally irrelevant, you should go to some internet research conferences. It's very hard to get operationally relevant research out of the community, and part of that is the communications problem with the operational community. But let me tell you, SIGCOM, Infocom, PAM, IMC, there's several different places you can submit internet infrastructure type papers. Their acceptance rates are like 10%. That means like SIGCOM gets 350 papers, accepts 18. Infocom gets 1,400 papers, accepts 200. 10% acceptance rate. You guys are at an 80% rate. I'm shocked you can get anything operationally relevant. I mean, the margin of error is worse than that. You're better odds in Vegas, right? So, wait, I didn't mean that either. So anyway, I think there's a level of questioning that I don't hear going on. If we're in a group therapy session, I'm happy to join it. I'm all about that. But I think there's other questions we should cast a little wider net with what we're doing.
Just a quick comment on that. I'm not sure that the main complaint, and of course this isn't a complaining session, I'm not sure the main complaint is the percentage of talks that get turned down. You know, from my personal experience, it hasn't been a huge issue, although I think the biggest problem isn't the percentage of talks that are turned down, but I've even heard this from some of the folks in the program committee, that it's often difficult for them to directly communicate to the folks who've actually contributed the talks to actually work with them and, you know, provide input on why something was rejected, work with them to get something in a better shape. I mean, I had a program committee member told me that right out, that you know, that person thinks that it needs to be fixed, that process is broken.
Well, okay, so if one great outcome of this meeting is that it's very clear to every single person in the community that we are desperate for more operational content as a program committee, to me that's a win, because it's true. And it's been true for a while. Desperate is a strong word, but let's speak strongly. And so that reminds me of the other thing. Vixie and I were having an argument earlier because I told him I was depressed that I gave a talk in 2003 on the top problems of the internet. I didn't give it to NANOG because I thought you guys knew already or something, but as a top problems of the internet and what researchers and sysadmin types can do to help. And so it's 2005 now, and like not one of the problems has gotten better. In fact, they've all gotten worse by some measures. So I'm thinking, is NANOG worried about these problems? Like, should the agenda be about tackling some of these problems, or no? Are these problems are these problems all rooted in something that is a dimension outside of NANOG? And in which case, I'm still back to okay. So what is the best use of the agenda time? Because we know what the best use of the hallway time is. And so going back to better operational content, Vixie and I were talking about incentives. There's an incentive structure problem in place with fixing a lot of the problems about the internet, and there was definitely an incentive structure problem in place with coming to NANOG and giving a talk about your company. So you're talking about, well, going out and nagging people. Well, we've already heard that some people have been nagged. We've heard other people say they've been discouraged. That's something we need to fix. But being nagged might not even be enough, because I know how busy you guys are, and I know how busy I am. And I haven't sent a talk into NANOG in 2 years because I haven't had time to do something I think would be operationally relevant, right? So NANOG might want to think about, paying expenses or something, travel that would help promote getting speakers here or something.
That's an interesting idea. I mean, because a lot of conferences do that, and maybe something for the community to think about is, you know, $350 or whatever we pay now compared to a lot of the other conferences I'm involved with and a lot of other people are, is pretty low. If the price for having content in the conference, for having 10 times better content where you don't want to leave the room during the day to go chat out in the hall, if that's an extra $50 a meeting, that you need to either expense or, deduct from your taxes every year. If that's the price of it, and if that paid for people to come to the meetings who otherwise couldn't, and those guys had just kick-ass content, maybe that's worth doing.
Okay, on that subject about getting extra speakers in, and maybe even subsidising them. Right now, the way NANOG works is the expense is shared equally amongst everybody. If you start comping people, apart from the speakers who get comp access now, if you start comping people in terms of travel and subsistence, you're creating a two-tier system. Right now, everybody's equal. We're all paying our way. Nobody's getting a free ride. If you get in for free, it's because you're doing something, and you're doing something worthwhile. Secondly, on terms of getting speakers, we have the same issue in the right meetings, getting people to come and do interesting things for EOF. And sometimes what it is people think that it has to be some sort of 45-minute opus of pure outstanding research that's a roller coaster ride. KC's good at that. It's great. We've got somebody who already does that, and we can maybe find some more people like it. But they don't have to be those sort of presentations. They could be 10 minutes. And I think people maybe feel that they've got to do something good or outstanding to get it past the program committee, and people should just submit things if they think they've got something worthwhile and want to go up there and talk about it. Submit it to the program committee, because I don't think they're going to laugh at you. And that was it, really. That was just what we're feeling as well right now in the right meetings, is actually going out and soliciting people and getting people to do this thing. That's it.
Thanks, Mike.
Steve Wilcox again. Firstly, I'd like to say there's a number of other forums that have sprung up recently. Bill mentioned peering forums and things that are going on. I've gone to some of this stuff. It's the same people there, and it's another trip, and I think it's got made before. But if we're all the same people needing to discuss something different, we can do it at the same place. Everyone's talking about the presentations, saying, oh, this is wrong or whatever, and Josh says they didn't find a lot relevant. Some people may find lots of MPLS talks relevant, and that's good for them. It doesn't actually matter about the presentations. There might be other things we need to do. Peering BOFs, there's no presentation required there. A whole bunch of other things. So don't get kind of hung up on getting loads of presentations. There's other things this group of people needs to do at these meetings when they come together. The second point I wanted to make was that most of the comments that are being made are about meeting structure, all this kind of stuff. The proposal that's been put forward is not about changing the meeting structure, it's about changing the overall thing of NANOG, and NANOG is a lot more than just a meeting, so don't get hung up on just giving loads of meeting comments.
Thanks, Steve.
Spencer Dawkins, Tektronix again. So someone mentioned the voice over IP word, and so Dave Meyer's doing a thing on IMS, which is a pretty seriously voice over IP technology on Tuesday morning, and I was thrilled to see that happen. The program committee's been asking for voice over IP input and calls for presentations, I think, for the last 3 or 4 NANOGs, and I don't know before that. And the program committee member is actually giving this talk. So I'm pretty excited that that's happening. I'm wondering what can be done to bring things forward, maybe a little bit. One of the we said we didn't need to talk about meeting stuff, but one meeting thing that might be helpful would be what groups have done with poster sessions, where people can, there's more structure for people to find each other. I think there's like 3 or 4 topics that you get dots for here, but it's only 3 or 4 topics. So if it had been possible for people who are doing wireless data networking to get together here, if it was easier to do that, if it was easier to do voice over IP stuff for the last year, that maybe that would be helpful as well. But just basically, like I said, thinking in terms of how members of the community can find each other to talk about stuff.
Thank you, Spencer. It looks like it's going to run over a little bit. Is that okay with the panel members? Based on the amount of people that are online right now, we've got about 5 minutes officially. Okay.
I'm Chaim Fried, and I'm unaffiliated at this point, but I've been in the video conferencing over IP space for the last 4.5 years, and prior to that, alongside that, network operator for all that time. And I always got the impression that there wasn't a lot of interest in video and VoIP at NANOG just because of the amount of presentations that were happening on it. So I haven't really been following what the program committee's been asking for. But my impression was that NANOG really focused on the network or supporting the actual network operations as opposed to the application layer. And what I think I'm hearing here is possibly redrawing that, or maybe that never existed and I'm wrong and I'm splitting hairs here that I shouldn't be. And I guess the question I'd like to know is it VoIP that we're interested in? And Vijay mentioned Vonage. Vonage doesn't maintain a network. So do we care about VoIP in terms of making sure the network is performing, so IP performance, which we had some good talks on in the past? Or do we really care about applications, such as what about online applications supporting the shared platforms of web collaboration or why is it just VoIP at this point? Why not use a slew of other managed applications, managed VPNs? Why aren't we talking about that? That's something we really want to do. And I think the question here is a question to the community as a whole. Is that where we want to take NANOG? Or do we want to focus? And somebody talked about overlap as well earlier. Overlap with other groups. If you don't change the structure of NANOG, there are a lot of groups that are affiliated with ITU, that are affiliated with IETF, that are already working on community groups to do, to talk about interrelationships in the VoIP community, in the some of the other communities we talked about. And are we overstepping our boundaries? Is that where we really want to go?
Thank you.
Rob Seastrom again, and I can speak directly to that I at least am always interested in hearing about things that my customers are likely to bring to me with a question in one hand and a pile of money in the other hand. In response to Vijay's comments, some of us do not have the luxury of working, speaking of money, in a situation where the money is relatively free-flowing, and we are interested in the various hacks, kludges, and other things that we can do with the equipment that is on hand to accommodate the requirements that the customer has, hopefully to get more money to be able to upgrade our networks with less consideration for what it costs. Zoom in briefly on what Mike and KC brought up. I believe, and I've seen this firsthand in another organization, most of you are probably aware that I'm on the ARIN-AC. There is a perception of unapproachability as regards ARIN, and I feel that same perception of unapproachability, and it's been cut down a lot tonight in terms of bringing stuff to the program committee to I've never seen those numbers before that Steve showed in his presentation. Those are interesting to me. That tells me something about the amount of stuff that's coming in. That tells me something about the competition in the field. I have no idea that this isn't SIGGRAPH because no one's told me. Going back to the ARIN thing, I get people coming to me, on a fairly regular basis saying, well, how do I do X, Y, and Z? And the answer is, well, actually, it's quite straightforward. You just file the published procedures and things just sort of magically work. And I believe that in this particular case, working towards a perception of approachability in terms of presenting at NANOG would result in more presentations, because nobody wants to do the work in coming up with a straw man presentation only to have it handed back to them in a pile of little pieces. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. We're going to call the gentleman with the white hat, the end of the shoe, so to speak.
Joel Krauska from Cisco Systems. I have a brief point to make. I think NANOG serves two main communities. Philip Smith gives the same BGP tutorial probably for the last 2 years. I don't know. People are constantly going to that, and I can't be the same people every time unless it's just slow learners. There are newbies, and then there are the habitual bar-going socialites. I'm sort of included in that. So there are two different fields, and Vijay is on the top end, and he knows how to build a full, great 192 network, but not everybody does, and there are a lot of newbies who show up here, and we need some sort of breadth, and that's, I don't know how that can be taken up. tracks, perhaps. I wanted to encourage VJ, if it's very easy and well known and everybody here should know how to do it, then open up your architecture and share it with everybody. And
Whoa. Elise Garrick, Juniper Networks. And I've really been encouraged to hear all the comments that everybody have had tonight. But one thing I was kind of curious about was there really, except for Rob, no one really addressed the discrepancies between the reform proposal and the numbers and the information that Steve gave. So it seemed like from the reform proposal that it was talking about NANOG and the administration of NANOG and the program committee as being a black box. And I think that that's, obviously a valid concern. And what we tried to do, both with Steve and Betty, was to give you some of that information. It's overdue. But except for Rob, nobody seemed to mention whether or not that information answered some of the questions that were raised by the reform group. For instance, one of the things that was raised is that it's arbitrary and there's really no process for selecting talks. And I think if you looked at Steve's presentation, it was quite clear that there is a process and that there is a methodology. It's not such an arbitrary black box where something goes in and magically something spits out. Also, we didn't talk about the membership of the program committee and how it does change over time. That's obviously seen as a black box also. There have been 4 new members added to the program committee within the last year. 2 of them are providers, one from Sprint, one from Level 3. And it is difficult to recruit people for the program committee. There are people who have also dropped off. So that is something we didn't share. Perhaps that's something we should share in the future. And then I think Betty did a very good job of mentioning moderation of the list. And I think, yes, people do get frustrated if they're the ones who are moderated. But if you look at the number, I think it was 257, I may get it backwards. Out of 10,000 messages, 257. Is this like an overreaction?
It is if it's the wrong 257.
Who's to say it's right or wrong?
Maybe
Another program committee may choose the wrong 257.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm just trying to say, why do you think you know what the right 257 are, and that the other 16 members or whomever made the choice didn't?
Okay, let me be really frank then.
Okay.
To answer your questions. First, I don't think that the reform group, yikes, at all talked about the fact that there was no procedure in the program committee. Just that
I think that's what your slide said.
No, it actually said none of us knew what it was.
Well, that's what I said. It's a black box.
Yeah,
and if you'd respond to the fact that it was answered
but there is a difference, between us saying that there isn't a procedure. There clearly is. It's just that it wasn't transparent, and that's certainly also the case with the list moderation. I think the complaint about the list moderation is probably, in the community, is probably a little more urgent. It's not so much about the number. I think it's about the procedure. I think it's the way it's been gone about. It's a real problem, and I think people were trying to be nice tonight, and we didn't want to be throwing a lot of stones about the moderation. But as far as I know, the program, and from what I've been told by folks in the program committee, is they're not involved in the moderation process. I mean, maybe this is another bit of transparency that's not happening, but I've had 3 program committee members tell me that they've never been consulted about a moderation decision. I don't know.
I'll have to defer.
It's unusual, and it's usually live. I'll see something happening on the list and send a message to our program committee. Should I stop this? Is this relevant? Because I'm not sure. So that's not true. I have gone back to the program committee for help.
Thanks, Sue. The question is to you every time. Thank you.
I am Sylvia Perrier from Teleglobe, and I wanted to ask the community what would be the best way to address operational problem. I mean, we're all here and we're all in some way competing or cooperating together. How many of you are ISPs? How many of you have operational problems? How many of you would get clearance from your engineering or your executives to bring those problems to the community and find a solution? I think I've made my point. We all have problems, and it's sometimes difficult to come and talk about it because you feel like you're opening yourself and you're becoming vulnerable, and you don't want to do that. So what's the best way to do that? I think the tracks are a good idea because it limits the audience. I don't think anybody would feel comfortable addressing 400 people about really ugly stuff that goes on in the network. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to disagree. I'm really not a fan of tracks. One of the main benefits of
Your name?
I'm sorry, I'm David Barak, SBC. One of the benefits of NANOG for me over the past several years has been the exposure to things that I wouldn't necessarily have encountered, and there have been a couple of times when we did engage in tracking, and I distinctly remember that it was the three most interesting things on the entire agenda were at the same time. It was really frustrating because I couldn't be obviously in all three places because I'm just not that good. So that was tremendously frustrating, and I don't think tracks solve that problem. I also don't think tracks make it any easier to get clearance from above, because I would have the same difficulty talking to a room of 10 people about any issues in my network that I would talking to a room of 10,000. So I mean the same managers would have to approve it. So that does not solve that problem. I do think that additional topics on applications and other things that ride on the network are a good idea, and I think that would be tremendously beneficial in terms of additional cross training and sort of cross pollination. And I'd just like to conclude by thanking everyone, both in Merit and in the Reform Group, and all of the program committee and all of the people who have spent so much time working pretty much for my benefit and the benefit of other people who aren't on all those committees, and doing a tremendous service for the community. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So that was okay. Make it quick.
Hi, I'm Tony Hiller from Broadwing. My only question is, now that the NANOG reform proposal has been put out there, is there any kind of next step here now that we've heard input from everyone?
We were just about to get to that, I think. So, Betty, any last closing remarks?
Sure. There definitely has to be some next steps. We knew that in October at Merit, and we know that tonight. I stand by my comments in October and some conversations I've had leading up to this meeting. The dialogue that we've had here tonight has been just outstanding. There are certainly positive points in the reform proposal. No question, a lot of time, thought, effort put into the information presented. Extremely important comments online from the community in terms of current issues facing the community, facing the organizational structure of NANOG. Absolutely important that we continue to have this dialogue. Absolutely critical that we take the next evolutionary change to support the community. The real challenge is going to be how to do that. You have my commitment, you have Merit's commitment behind me to engage with the reform community, to outline some next steps to create an organizational structure that addresses the concerns raised tonight, but again, ones that we're all in together. I think that we all acknowledge going into this meeting tonight there was the fear factor of an us-them situation. I hope that through our dialogue tonight, we've convinced ourselves that it's not an us-them situation, that we all want the same thing, which is to see NANOG evolve and to serve the community and stay whole. We need to be careful and thoughtful as we make those next set of decisions so that we can support the community into the future. I can't sit here today and tell you that I know exactly what the next step is going to be. What I hope to be able to share with you is a commitment to those changes, to identify some folks in the reform community to work with me, with members of the program committee, to outline and take those next steps, and to make that happen quickly. I hope that I've demonstrated through discussion and presentation with you this evening that there's no question list moderation is a hot topic. Got the message in October, have made some changes back at Merit in terms of our structure and handling of the list, and I got the message that we need to take some stronger steps and do some things immediately separate from some of the organizational structures of NANOG and the program committee, and you have my commitment to deal with some of those changes ASAP. So I don't want to sit here and make a bunch of promises to you that I have all of the answers. I did come here tonight to get information, which we've gotten, and I think that the dialogue has been excellent, and I look forward to bringing back information to the community and continuing this kind of dialogue. That's really what I can offer.
Okay, thanks, Betty. I want to thank all the panelists, the moderators, the standbys, the helpers. Susan Harris helped put this together. Thanks, Susan. And I think we can adjourn. Thank you.